Hi folks, HR Funk here with part 3 in my series on accuracy tweaks for my new Remington Model 700 rifle. And if you've missed the previous installments in this series, I would encourage you to go back and watch them. In part 1, I identified all the things about this rifle that I wanted to change in order to hopefully improve its accuracy. And in part 2, which was the last installment, I actually started to make some of those changes. So I'm already part way into the process. And if you haven't seen those, go back and watch them and it'll catch you up to where I am now. In this installment, I'm going to be looking at this Remington Factory X-Mark Pro trigger, and actually I'm going to be swapping it out, and I'm going to show you right now what I'm going to be using to replace the factory trigger. Now, back in November of 2023, some of you may recall that I produced my first evaluation video with my new rifle, and shortly thereafter I went out to the range and conducted my first accuracy assessment. And during the course of those 2 sessions with the rifle, I found that the factory X-Mark Pro trigger is somewhat lacking. It has a very distinct step or creep that I can feel as I'm starting to apply pressure to the trigger. I'll apply pressure slowly, 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 and then all of a sudden it moves about a 32nd of an inch, which is somewhat distracting when you're shooting. And also the trigger is somewhat inconsistent. There are times where I'm applying pressure slowly and steadily, and the trigger breaks basically as it should. Then there are other times where it feels like I'm just starting to apply pressure to the trigger and it breaks and the rifle fires. So neither one of these are conducive to good accuracy with the rifle. And I knew early on I wanted to swap out that factory trigger with something else, but I wasn't sure what that something else was going to be. Now, I have some past experience with jewel triggers and Timney triggers, and those both are good triggers, nothing wrong with them. But this time around, I thought I wanted to try something a little bit different, and what I decided on was a TriggerTech trigger. Now, this is going to be my first experience with something from TriggerTech, and I'll give you a close-up look at this trigger and tell you a little bit about it before I start the installation process. So specifically, the trigger that I'm going to be using is the TriggerTech Remington 700 primary trigger, and this is a limited edition of the primary trigger. This is the, if you can see it in there, primary independence, and the only difference between this and the standard primary trigger is this one is rendered in red, white, and blue. You can't see the red part, that's on the other side. There were a few of these left the last time that I looked at the Optics Planet website, so if you're interested in one, you better check there quick. But the standard black version is identical in every way other than the color. This is an adjustable trigger, and it's adjustable from 1.5 to 4 pounds, which is the range where I like my triggers to be. I don't want an extremely light trigger in this rifle, and TriggerTech makes some other models that are lighter if you want to go that route, but this is the one I wanted to use. Now, according to TriggerTech, they have a 30-day satisfaction guarantee, so if you get the trigger and you don't like it, you can send it back and they will refund your money. And they also have a product lifetime warranty. This is considered a zero creep trigger, and that creep is the issue that I'm having with the factory X-Mark Pro, and hopefully I'm going to be able to alleviate that altogether with this new model. So I'm looking forward to trying this out. As I said, this is going to be my first experience with a TriggerTech trigger, and I'm looking forward to it. And by the way, folks, this TriggerTech trigger was provided to me by Optics Planet. They have partnered with me for this project. I want to say thanks to all the folks at OP, and be sure if you go there, you use my discount code, which is, and that'll save you 7% off your purchase from Optics Planet. Now let's get on with the installation of this TriggerTech trigger in my rifle. So at this point, I've removed the rifle from its stock and positioned it back in my Real Avid master gun vise here. And one of the challenges associated with recording a video like this is trying to get everything where you can see it, have things where I can see that, be able to work and not cover up your view, and still be able to see what I'm doing. So if you see a light moving around, that's because I actually have a light attached to my head right now, so I can see what I'm going to be doing here. And what I'm going to be doing is driving out the 2 pins that hold the factory trigger. My plan is to not drive them all the way out. I'm going to drive the front pin out from, as you're looking at it, from top to bottom. For my perspective, it's from right to left. And I want to have it just far enough that it frees out the front, or frees up the front of the trigger. and still retains the pin in the side of the receiver. Then I'm going to drive the rear pin from the bottom to the top, or from my left to my right, and I want to try to retain that just enough inside the receiver to keep the bolt catch, which is this part right here, from coming out of the receiver. Now if it comes out, it's not a real big deal. I can put it back in, but it just works a little bit nicer and makes it a little bit easier if I can keep this mechanism together. So let's start to drive this out. And by the way, this is a 3/32 punch that I'm using. And that pin is moving very easily. And I don't know that it's far enough to come out of there yet. And I might lose the sear. And no, not quite far enough to come out yet. Now I've got to push the sear back down a little bit so I can get the punch back through. Don't have much farther to go. Let's see if that did it. Yes, that freed up the front of the trigger. Now I'm going to reorient the vise a little bit, because right now I would have to try to punch this way. It's just not going to work right. So give me just a moment to change things around and I'll start the video again. I've got to tell you folks, this master gun vise is really helpful with doing these kind of things, because I can position this barreled action in virtually any orientation and still be able to work on it, which really helps out when I'm trying to position cameras and lights and everything else, not to mention myself. In order to drive the rear trigger pin through the receiver this way, the safety has to be in the safe position just to open up access to the pin itself. And I'm now going to start to drive this one through. And this is still going to be a little bit awkward. But it's moving pretty easily. And I'm going to see if I can move it by hand. No, I can't. When I get a little farther out, I might be able to just use my fingers and slowly try to move it. Again, what I'm trying to do is just keep the bolt catch mechanism all together. And there went the sear and the sear spring from the factory trigger. There we go. And there's the X-Mark Pro trigger removed from the barreled action. So this is actually almost going too easily. I'm kind of waiting for the first thing to go wrong. And by the way, there you can see the red, white, and blue on this trigger, which looks nice here, but once it's installed, that's not going to be visible. Let me change this just a little bit to make it easier for you to see. And what I might be able to do is start to get this rear pin installed by hand before I start trying to tap anything. For some reason, the front is not wanting to move into place. So let me do a little finagling here and see what I can do. Could be that I don't have that front pin quite far enough over, so let me give that a couple of taps. And I don't think you can see it, but that front pin is protruding slightly into the trigger channel here, so let me tap that over just a little farther to get it out of the way and see if the new trigger wants to go in there now. That made all the difference in the world. So now, as I said, I can start to try to position the rear of the trigger. And what I'm going to do is use my punch to sort of hold everything in place and just start to move that in And I think it started. There we go, yeah. And you can see that that's pretty much easy enough that I can get it over there, and it's holding the rear of the trigger now. So I will do essentially the same thing in the front, just to help line everything up. And now I can start to tap this one back through. All right, I'm going to finish just seating that pin off camera. And after a few more taps and a few bad words, that front pin is in position. And it's important to make sure that it's not bearing against the bolt latch right here, so I don't think it is. In fact, no, it is still below flush with the side of the receiver there. So now I'm just going to tap this rear pin in place, which should go pretty easily. And yes, much more easily than the front pin, although this is still kind of awkward. And again, I just want that to be flush with the edge of the bolt latch there, and that looks perfect. So the new trigger is now installed. Let's see if it's going to work. There's one slight adjustment I'm going to have to make right here. The bolt release is not quite where it needs to be right at the very back here, so I'm just going to bend that slightly and bring it back where it belongs. That looks perfect. There we go. That is right where it needs to be. So for some function tests, I've replaced the bolt in the barreled action, and the first test is going to be just cycling the action. And you can see the rear of the firing pin here. We're just going to make sure that doesn't fall when the action is cycled, and it doesn't. Next, with the safety on, I'm going to squeeze the trigger and make sure the firing pin doesn't fall, and it does not. Now I'm going to take the safety off and squeeze the trigger, and at this point the firing pin should fall, which it did. Now I'm going to cycle the action again. Make sure the firing pin doesn't fall. Put the safety back on, give a firm squeeze on the trigger, and the trigger does not move, firing pin doesn't fall. Safety off, and the firing pin falls. So it appears to be working fine. There is a more extensive battery of tests that are listed in the instructions for the TriggerTech trigger, and I will be performing those. I'm just not going to go through them on camera. I'll also repeat them when I get out to the range before I actually start to fire this for any type of testing. But by all appearances, the trigger is working properly. Now I want to try to get a trigger pull weight on this trigger and see where it's breaking. Now, according to the instructions that came with this TriggerTech trigger, at the factory they set these about midway through the range of pull weights. So this trigger has a range of 1.5 to 4 pounds, so it should break right around 3 pounds. Let's see if that's about where it is. And if it's at 3 pounds, I'm probably going to leave it right there until I do some testing with the trigger. And I might have overpulled that one a little bit. I got 3 pounds, 13.8 ounces. Let me slow it down a little bit for this next pull. Just make sure I didn't pull that after the trigger broke. £3 pounds, 10.6 ounces. I think that was a much better pull. I'm going to try one more. And 3 pounds, 9.8 ounces. And I don't know if you could see any of those. I was not looking at the camera, I was looking at the gauge. But the average for 3 pulls is 3 pounds, 11.4 ounces. So over 3.5 pounds, that's a little heavier than I would like this to be. So I think I am going to give it just a bit of an adjustment and see if I can bring that down a little closer to the 3 to 3.5 pound range. So an Allen wrench came with the TriggerTech trigger for adjusting the pull weight, and turning the screw right in front of the bolt release clockwise will increase the pull weight. Turning it counterclockwise will decrease the pull weight, and I'm just going to go a little bit here. Let's go about 3 clicks and see what that might have done for the trigger pull weight. And not much. 3 pounds, 10.4 ounces. Let's try another one. Three pounds, 9.2 ounces. And 3 pounds, 8.7 ounces. So it might have reduced it just a little bit, but I think I'm going to take a little farther, just try to get it down below that 3.5 pound setting. All right, let's try it there and see what happens. 3 pounds, 4.7 ounces. Three pounds, 5.8 ounces, and I did overpull that a little bit. It broke back around 3 pounds, 4.9 or so. So a little bit of human error on that one. See if I can get one more really good pull. 3 pounds, 6.0 ounces. So I'm in that 3 to 3.5 pound range, and I'm going to leave it right there. That should be very good when I get out to the range. Now I'm going to reassemble everything inside the stock and try this actually with my trigger finger and see how it feels. Oh, by the way, I didn't show you the 3-pull average for those last 3, and the average was 3 pounds, 5.5 ounces. So not bad at all. That's right in the range where I like my triggers to be. All right, I'm going to try to get you a good look at this. Hopefully you can see my trigger finger well. And I'm slowly applying pressure to the trigger. And that is a very nice break. I'm not detecting any creep whatsoever. Very, very nice. Now I am really looking forward to getting this rifle out on the range and trying it with that trigger because it feels extremely good. The pull weight is not overly light, but as I said before, it's right where I like it. And that's going to do it for the trigger installation video, folks. Hope you enjoyed this segment. In the next segment, I'm going to be going over adding a muzzle device to this rifle. Now, some of you are probably saying, wait a minute, HR Funk, that rifle doesn't have a threaded barrel. And you're absolutely right, and I'll show you how we're going to tackle that next time. But that's going to do it for now. If you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, if you purchase anything from Optics Planet, be sure to use my discount code, which is... And if you use that discount code, it's good for 7% off your purchase from Optics Planet. And again, thanks to Optics Planet for partnering with me on this project. And be sure to check out House of Pain. You can use my discount code there, which is HRFunk10, and that'll save you some money off your purchase from House of Pain. And don't forget the Target sponsor, folks. Go to Target's online, check out their inventory, and see if they have anything that's going to meet your Target needs. See you next time. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.